I'm well. Nice to see you.
Likewise, likewise.
There's quite a lot of questions in people's minds about what's going on and what is going to happen with this virus, and in particular with our economy. And I thought, uh, interesting way to answer some of those questions for myself and for some of those people would be to have a conversation with you and get a sense of what you're thinking.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for opening this conversation. I think it's very important in these times to have as much information on these issues as one can get, and for the public to be as informed as possible.
One of the big issues that I have, and one of the things I'm thinking about, is how we should think about opening up the economy. Which are the parts you think of the economy that are critical to be opened up, and what's the sequence of opening up?
It's a great question because I think as we turn from trying to bend the curve on infections and preventing hospitals and medical facilities from being overwhelmed, we have to start thinking about restarting people's livelihoods. It's all too easy to have a lockdown forever, but obviously that is unsustainable for the economy. So it has to be a sequencing. First, the places where you can maintain distancing, and it's not just distancing in the workplace, it's also distancing to and fro from the workplace, the transportation structure. Do people have private means of transport, their cycles or their scooters, or even cars? Or do they depend on public transport? And if it's public transport, how do you maintain distance in public transport? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, both on creating the structures as well as ensuring at the workplace it is relatively safe, as well as ensuring if there are accidents, there are fresh cases, how do you isolate quickly without having to go to a second lockdown or a third lockdown? Those will be devastating if we have to go there.
That's what a lot of people say, that if you get into a cyclical lockdown, if you open up and then you're forced to shut down, and then you open up and you're forced to shut down again, then that is devastating for economic activity because it would completely destroy trust. You'd agree with that?
I think that's right, because that would suggest, you take even a second lockdown, it means that you haven't been completely successful in doing in reopening, and that raises questions of if you reopen again, will you go into a third lockdown? So it does diminish credibility. That said, I don't think we have to aim for 100% sort of success. That is zero cases when we open up. That's unachievable. What we have to do is manage the reopening so that when there are cases, we isolate them.
But at the heart of that management, knowing which areas are having heavy infections, which areas are not, at the heart of that process, of course, is testing. And there's a sense in India, and that the testing capability is in itself limited. That we're a big country, and that our ability to test, like the United States or like the European countries, is comparatively limited. So how would you think about it with a sort of low level of testing? I mean, would you?
It's a great question because take the United States right now. It's ramped up to about 150,000 tests per day. But the consensus amongst experts, certainly the epidemiologists, is that to really be confident about opening up, you have to triple that to 500,000 tests a day at least. And some are talking of numbers in the millions. Well, just multiply by 4 to get 4.5 to get India's population. And you're talking about 2 million tests a day if you want to get the level of confidence that you have in the United States. And clearly, we are nowhere near that. I think we're somewhere around 30,000 tests a day at this point. But we have to be cleverer about opening up, which means perhaps do mass testing. Take, 1,000 samples, and then check in a mass way whether there is any sign of the virus in those 1,000 samples. And if you do find that, then go deeper into that particular sample and check who it might be. But this way, I mean, these are ways of testing which reduce the burden on the test infrastructure and can allow us to try and vet much more. It's in some sense less intensive, but it is cleverer. We have to be cleverer about the reopening because we simply can't wait till we have that kind of facility.
There's going to be the impact of the virus, and then after some time there's going to be the impact on the economy, a sort of blowback impact that is going to come, real impact that is going to come a couple months from now. How do you sort of make the balance between fighting the virus right now and fighting the consequences of the virus 3 or 4 months down the line?
I think there has to be a prioritization because our capacities and our resources are limited. Certainly our fiscal resources are more limited than the West. So what we need to do is decide, how do we keep this economy together so that when we reopen up, it's sort of able to walk off the sick bed and not be impaired at that point. So most immediately, I think keep people well and alive. Food is extremely important. Reach it to every place. Places our public distribution system does not go. Amartya Sen and Abhijit Banerjee and I have talked about temporary ration cards, for example, for people who don't have access. But you have to treat this pandemic as a situation which is unprecedented. We have to break norms in order to tackle what is needed, while at the same time keeping in mind that there's an overall budgetary sort of limit. There are only so many resources we have.
What do you think about the agricultural sector and the workers, migrant workers? How should we be thinking about their finances?
Well, this is where I think the efforts we made on direct benefits transfers sort of needs to be realized at this point. All the ways we transfer to relatively poor people, we need to take a call on that. We have different ways of accessing through widows' pensions, through the Manrega rolls, and we need to say, look, these are people who don't have a job right now, who don't have a livelihood. And for the next 3 or 4 months, while this uncertainty is on, we're going to support them. But in terms of the sort of priority, keeping people alive and keeping them from having to go onto the street, in protest or looking for work is probably useful at a time of lockdown. And so I think we need to find ways of getting both money as well as food through the public distribution system to as many of ththese people as we can.
तो डॉक्टर राजन, कितना पैसा लगेगा गरीबों की मदद करने के लिए?
तकरीबन 65,000 करोड़
60,000
और 65,000 करोड़ इतना ज्यादा नहीं है. हमारा जीडीपी 200 लाख करोड़ है और उसमें 65,000 करोड़ इतना ज्यादा नहीं है, तो कर सकते हैं. और अगर ये गरीबों के लिए है और अगर उनका जिंदगी बचाने के लिए है तो करना चाहिए.
अभी तो देश संकट में है, मगर कोविड के बाद हिंदुस्तान को इस घटना से कोई फायदा भी होगा, कोई स्ट्रेटेजिक फायदा होगा, दुनिया में कोई बदलाव होंगे जिससे हिंदुस्तान को फायदा होगा या जिनकी हिंदुस्तान एडवांटेज ले सके? किस प्रकार से दुनिया बदलेगी आपके मुताबिक?
These kinds of incidents rarely have positive effects for any country, in general. But there are ways countries can take advantage of them. And what I think we can say is that there will have to be a rethinking of everything in the global economy. once we are out of this. If there is opportunity for India, it is in shaping that dialogue, in being more of a leader in that dialogue, because it is not one of the two big warring parties, but is a big enough country to hear its voice, to have its voice heard in the global economy. In this situation, India can find opportunities for its industry, for its supply chains, but most importantly, it can try and mold the dialogue towards one which has greater place for more countries in the global order, a multipolar global order rather than a single or a bipolar global order.
Don't you think there's a crisis of centralization? That there is too much centralization of power taking place, and the conversations are stopping. I mean, I think it would conversations would help a lot of these problems that you're talking about, but it sort of breaks down for some reason.
I do believe that decentralization is important both for bringing more local information to work, something we talked about earlier, but also about giving empowerment to the people. What you see across the world is a great sense of disempowerment. Decisions are being made elsewhere, not by me.
Yeah.
I have a vote, but that elects somebody in a far off place. My local sort of panchayat or state government has less power. They don't feel they can, alter anything, and so they become prey to a different set of force. I would ask you the same question. I mean, do you see this whole, Panchayati Raj, which Rajiv Gandhi, your father brought back? What effect has that had, and has that been beneficial?
It's had a huge effect, but I'm sorry to say it's in retreat. So a lot of the forward movement on Panchayati Raj that had taken place, we are now moving back to a sort of bureaucratic, BM-based structure or a bureaucrat-based structure. And if you look at the southern states, they are doing a better job because they are actually more decentralized. And the northern states are centralizing power, and they're taking away power from the panchayats and the sort of grassroots organization.
The closer decisions are taken to people, the more ability they have to keep a check on those decisions. So I think it's an experiment worth doing.
But what do you think is causing this at a global level? Why do you think we are having this sort of massive centralization and stopping a conversation? What do you think? There's a central cause, or do you think there are a number of?
I do think there is a cause, and I think it is the global markets. Right? There is a sense that if markets globalize, market participants, firms, for example, want to see the same rules everywhere. They want to see the same coordinating structure everywhere. They want to see the same government everywhere, because that then gives them confidence. That attempt at uniformity takes away power from the sort of local or national governments. Of course, in addition, there is the bureaucratic temptation to centralize. If I can grab the power, why not? And so that is a constant desire to, if you're providing funding to the states, here are the rules that you must obey in order to get this funding. Not, I will give you this funding, no questions asked, because I know you've also been elected, and you will have to have a sense of what is appropriate for you.
There's a new model also out, which is the authoritarian model, which is questioning the sort of liberal model, and it's a different way of doing work, and it seems to be more and more rising in more and more places. Do you think it's going to get pushed back?
I don't know, because the central authoritarian model, the strong figure, in a world where you're powerless, is sometimes appealing. Especially if you can develop a personal rapport
Yeah.
with that figure, and you feel, they believe in me. They care for the people. The problem with that is the authoritarian figure can develop their own sort of sense of, yes, I am the power of the people, and therefore whatever I say goes. My rules apply, not the checks and balances, not the institutions, not the decentralized structure. Everything is going to go through me. The sort of historically, what has happened is that has put too much weight on that center. And eventually that collapses.
But clearly, something has gone wrong with the global economic system. I mean, that's pretty clear, right? Would that be a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement, that it's not working for a lot of people. The growing inequality of incomes and wealth in developed countries is certainly a source of the concern. The precariousness of jobs, the so-called precariat, is another source of concern. You have these gig jobs without any sense of whether you will have income tomorrow. And of course, we've seen during the pandemic, many of these people don't have any support. They have lost out on both incomes as well as their safety net. Therefore, what we have today is both a problem of slowing growth. So we cannot dispense with markets. We do need growth. But we also have a problem of stuck or inadequate distribution. People aren't getting the fruits of that growth in the same ways. Many people are being left out. And so we need to think about both sides. And that's why I think rather than focus on distributing output, distribute opportunity.
It's interesting that you said that infrastructure connects people and that gives opportunity. But if there is division and hatred, that disconnects people. That's also infrastructure. There's an infrastructure of division and infrastructure of hatred. And that causes as big a problem.
Absolutely. I think social harmony is a public good. Having everybody believe that they're part of the system and equal part of the system is essential. We cannot afford to be a house divided, especially in these times when our challenges are so big. And so I would prefer to put, our founding fathers, people who wrote our constitution, and the early sort of administrations. That's something I've been spending some time sort of relearning. And those people realized that there were some issues which you wanted to put on a shelf and not touch. Because if we got into those issues, we would spend a long time fighting each other.
Also, you tend to divide and look backwards into history when you're struggling with a forward vision. So I think I like what you said about India needs a new vision. What would be the elements of that in your view? Of course, you mentioned in infrastructure, education, healthcare, but how would it be different than the last 30 years or 20 years? What would be the pillars that would be different?
Well, I think that on the one hand, you need to create capabilities. The elements of creating capabilities is, better education, better healthcare, better infrastructure. And remember, when we talk about creating these capabilities, we have to walk the talk. But we also, make no mistake, need to rethink what our industrial and market system looks like. We still have the remnants of the old license permit Raj. And we need to figure out how we go to a place where the accent is on creating many, many more new jobs of a good quality. And there, more freedom, trust but verify is a good idea there.
What's amazed me and is how important mahal is to economics. Sentiment, how important sentiment and trust is to economics. And one of the things I'm finding during this COVID issue is that the real problem is the trust issue. People don't quite understand what is going to happen next, and so there is fear in the system. You talked about unemployment. We had a big high level of unemployment that's now going to be massive. How do we think about unemployment going forward 2-3 months from now when the impact of this thing actually hits?
Well, the numbers are really worrying, right? If you look at CMI and says that, virtually 100 million more people have been put out of work as a result of this COVID. 50 million through unemployment, 60 million through leaving the labor force. Now, you can dispute what the particular survey does or says, but this is the only data we have. And the numbers are just mind-boggling. I think, again, this says we need to open up in a measured way, but as fast as possible, so that people start having jobs, because we don't have the capacity to support people across the spectrum for too long. And being a poor country, a relatively poor country, people start out with significantly lower reserves. But let me throw the question back at you. We see a lot of measures in the United States as well as Europe based on the kind of realities on the ground. The government in India, of course, has a different kind of reality that they're facing. What are the big differences in your view between the governing in the West and dealing with the reality of life in India?
I mean, the scale, first of all, the scale of the problem, and at its heart, the financial scale of the problem, the inequality, and the nature of the inequality. So things like caste, the way Indian society is structured is completely different than American society, as you know. And some of the ideas that hold India back are deeply embedded and often hidden. So I think there's a lot of sort of social change that is required in India. And a lot of these problems are different in different states. The politics of Tamil Nadu, the culture of Tamil Nadu, the language of Tamil Nadu, the way the Tamils think, completely different than the way UPites think. And so you have to model things around them. One blanket solution for the whole of India just will not work. It can't work. So there is, in our government, which I think is completely different than the United States, there is an element in our governance system, in our administration system of control, as opposed to, we have a district collector as opposed to a producer, right? So our idea is always one of control. And I don't think people say, oh, this is since the British. I don't think so. I think this is historic before the British. The idea, governance in India is always about trying to control. And I think that's one of the challenges that we're facing now. The COVID disease cannot be controlled. One of the things that sort of annoys me is the level of inequality. And this has been the case, in India over the last few decades. The level of inequality that you see in India, you simply cannot see in the United States. I mean, and so the type of things I always look at is how to sort of reduce this inequality, because I think once a system reaches a very high level of inequality, then it simply stops to work. I like Gandhiji's line, just go to the back of the line and see what's going on at the back of the line. This is a very powerful thing for a politician. It's underrated, but I think that's where a lot of the insights come in. How would you think about going forward, dealing with this inequality? It's visible in COVID also. I mean, the way India is treating its poor people, the way we are treating our poor people, migrants, versus the way the elite is being treated, two completely different ideas, two completely different Indias. And so, how do you merge these two Indias into one?
Well, I think that, at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, we have some ways of making their lives a little better, but we need to think more carefully about reaching everybody there. And I think successive governments have worked on food, on healthcare, on education, and no doubt we can do a better job there. But in terms of challenges, it seems to me that there is certainly an administrative challenge in reaching everywhere and making sure that level of living is enhanced. But the greater challenge to me lies in the range between the lower middle class and the middle class, which is where we need, in a huge way, jobs, good quality jobs, so that people are not, dependent on a sarkari job and the comforts that come with it. So this is something that I think we need to work on. And this is where I think a tremendous expansion in the economy is absolutely necessary. We've seen over the last so many years a progressive decline in our rate of economic growth, when in fact we have so many young people entering the labor force. So I would say, let us not pick amongst possibilities, but create the opportunity for any kind of area to flourish. If there's a mistake we made in the past, we said, this is the only way to grow. And think of what, one of the most successful areas we've grown in software and outsourcing services. Who would have thought that that would be India's strength? And it just emerged. And some people even argue that it emerged only because the government didn't pay attention to it. Now, I'm not in that camp. But we need to allow for any possibility and let the enterprise of our people take a step.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rajan.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
And you're safe?
I'm safe. Good luck with everything. Thank you. Bye.